When you think about horror movies, you might think about the music. Most of us have heard Psycho's iconic strings, or the pulsing two-note motive in Jaws. A good film composer knows the power of music in triggering our fight or flight response, something that is key to making a horror movie feel scary.
Many of the compositional techniques that a film composer uses come from classical music. And horror movie music is no exception. For horror films, most composers drew inspiration from an artist movement of the early 20th century called Expressionism. The Expressionist movement influenced all areas of art, but also aspects of life like design and fashion. Hello, I'm Eva Peng.
And I'm Anthony Olson. In this video, we will be discussing the rise of Expressionism and its development in music. Expressionism is an artistic trend that began around the turn of the 20th century. It is an artistic movement that tried to directly capture emotions, especially intense feelings like fear, hopelessness, or abandonment. A lot of the compositional techniques developed by classical composers in this movement made their way into horror films. Things like unusual sounds or extremely dissonant combinations of notes trigger emotions like fear, dread, or foreboding. These particular emotions were everywhere in the beginning of the 20th century and led, in part, to the development of Expressionism.
The Expressionistic movement began in Germany and Austria in the late 19th century and early 20th century, impacting not only music, but the visual and performing art as a whole.
It came about during a time when people were confronting something never before imagined. Changes in society and life experience were happening faster than ever before. Faster than they ever have since. Within just a few decades, we learned to fly, to communicate using electrical and radio signals, and to build and drive automobiles. But humanity was also dealing with the psychological and social horrors of conflict on a scale never before imagined, the First World War. The massive amount of destruction and death heightened anxiety and fear, leaving many unsettled and mentally unbalanced. New technologies contributed to death and destruction on a scale that was unthinkable in a generation earlier. World War I was a shock to society at the time, questioning everyone's sense of trust, safety, and security.
Art is a reflection of society, and there were some artists at this time who attempted to capture this emotion and the psychological and the social horrors. In the visual art, many artists use distorted or geometry shape and sharp angles in their work. They turned away from outward views and instead tried to capture inner emotions. They wanted to express the raw, unconscious feelings themselves, and not just what those feelings looked like on the outside.
Many artists turn to what we might call ugly topics, like madness, death, destruction, desolation. Visual artists use deliberately distorted images to shock or to express tension and anguish. Many explored the hopelessness and plight of the poor, the massive destruction and bloodshed of war, or the inhumane treatment they saw in the world around them. Horror was explored in all its forms, whether that just be a sense of dread, uneasiness, anxiety, or foreboding, or more extremes of devastation, death, or hopelessness. In music, expressionistic composers explored extremely harsh dissonances, very disjunct melodies, and new and bizarre sounds. They even abandoned tonality. For those of you who are not musicians, think of tonality or a tonal center as a kind of home base. And then imagine if someone suddenly started playing a new type of baseball that had no home base. This is how different this new type of music was. It allowed dissonance to reign freely throughout a piece of music. You can hear this dissonance in this short excerpt from Schoenberg's Piero Luiz. This new use of dissonance and bizarre sounds laid the foundation for horror film composers of the 1950s and 1960s. There were three main composers who embraced Expressionism and brought it into the world of music: Arnold Schoenberg and two of his students, Alban Berg and Anton Webern. Collectively, they became known as the Second Viennese School. And the story of these three individuals starts in Vienna around the turn of the 20th century.
Arnold Schoenberg was born into the lower middle class family in Vienna in the year of 1874. He showed a talent for composition at early age and took lessons from the Australian composer, conductor, and teacher Alessandra Zimnivsky. In his early adulthood, he supported himself financially as a bank clerk while still composing. In his mid-20s, he married Zimnivsky's sister, and the couple settled in Berlin. Here, he taught at the Stir Academy, but soon after, he returned to Vienna and to start a private teaching studio. Alban Berg and Anton Weber were among his first pupils. His earliest work were written in the standard musical style of the time, but soon after, Schoenberg started experimenting with a new way of organizing harmonies and sounds. When he first shared these new experimental pieces, it caused a scandal. After each concert, the critics rushed to their office to report that Schoenberg had lost his mind. His new music was atonal. There were no key, no home base in the music, which left the listeners confused and disoriented.
As he experimented with musical sound, Schoenberg developed something he called Klangfarbenmelodie, or tone-color melody in English. Tone-color melody involves taking a melody and splitting it up between several different instruments, rather than having just one instrument or group of instruments play that melody. This way, the sound or tone color changes over time. This technique is used frequently today in video game music and experimental popular music. Here's an example of this technique being used by British rock band Gentle Giant.
Schoenberg created a new performance technique for vocal music too. He wanted to communicate the feeling of fear and horror and bring them to life in the listener through vocal sounds. To do this, he created something that he called Expressionism, called speech singing in English. Just like the name sound, the vocal technique is something between speaking and singing. The singer does not sing or speak words. Instead, they create simple melodic speech. Expressionism has been used by many composers since Schoenberg created it 100 years ago. You might have heard it in the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Piero Luiz was one of the first pieces to use the Sprechstimme technique. Composed by Schoenberg in 1912, Piero Luiz is one of the first pieces of expressionistic music and also one of the first atonal works. The bizarre, nervous, and iconic tone of this song cycle mirrors the mood of pre-World War I Europe. The text is based on the stock character from Italian Commedia dell'arte. Piero is the character of the sad clown.
Composed for soprano with a chamber ensemble, Piero is about an episode in the life of a mischievous clown with a chalk white face. In the poems, Piero is obsessed with the moon. Piero is out to have fun, but he's disturbed by the white spot, a patch of moonlight on the collar of his jacket. So he raps and raps, but cannot get rid of it. The story is a perfect fit for Expressionism, exploring the emotion of inner anxiety, stress, and despair. And Schoenberg's use of Klangfarben melody and the Expressionism within atonal harmony helps to really bring the story to life.
Arnold Schoenberg wrote in this freely atonal style for the next decade or so, until his productivity slowed substantially. He eventually realized that he needed to find a way of organizing musical tones. He had abandoned a centuries-old tradition of tonal harmony, and he wanted to develop a compositional technique to take its place. In the early 1920s, after years of thinking and experimenting, he developed a system of organizing the 12 tones of the chromatic scale, organizing them in a way that allowed composers to treat them more equally, without any one tone becoming a tonal center. And he called this new system Serialism. Serialism is a complex, almost mathematical procedure for organizing the 12 tones of the chromatic scale. In serialism, a composer takes the 12 tones and arranges them in some order, any order they choose, using each note only once, like musical Sudoku. This Sudoku-like arrangement is called a row. Once the composer has made their row, they can systematically manipulate it throughout the piece of music, transposing it, moving it up or down, inverting it, turning it upside down, or putting it in retrograde, arranging it backwards. Or a composer could combine these procedures as they wrote their piece of music. Upon developing this new musical procedure, Schoenberg said, quote, "I have discovered something which will assure the supremacy of German music for the next 100 years." But he would not remain in the German-speaking area of the world much longer. Schoenberg was of Jewish heritage, and the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party in the 1930s did not bode well for him. He relocated to the United States, settling in Los Angeles for the remainder of his life. He supported himself by teaching, first at the University of Southern California and later at UCLA.
Schoenberg was apparently a very nice and kind person. We were fortunate enough to have studied with one of the students he taught during his years at the UCLA. The young lady in the photo is our teacher, Natalie Mnemonic. Natalie trained as a pianist and went on to become director of opera at the UCLA and later in USC. We both studied with her privately at her West Los Angeles home when she was in her retirement years, study voice and vocal accompanying.
During his time in the United States, Schoenberg composed a number of new pieces, including one entitled A Survivor from Warsaw. This piece is a dramatic cantata for narrator, male chorus, and orchestra. The text changes freely between English, German, and Hebrew, the languages that Schoenberg spoke, and the narrative is set in World War II Germany. It portrays the horror experienced by the Jewish people who lived through this cruel time in our world's history. Schoenberg's musical techniques, his use of atonality, serialism, Klangfarben melody, and Sprechstimme, are used to great effect to capture the horror of the Holocaust.
They came out, some very slowly, the old ones, the sick ones, some with nervous agility, the fearless sergeant, to hurry as much as he can, in vain. Much too much noise, much too much commotion. It was fast enough. Der Feldwebel schaut. Achtung! Stillgestanden! Na jetzt mal! Oder soll ich bitten, wir können nachhelfen? Na gut, wenn ihr das haben wollt! The sergeant and his subordinates hit everyone, young or old, strong or sick, guilty or innocent. It was painful to hear them groaning and moaning.
Schoenberg passed away in 1951 and his body was returned to Vienna. He was laid to rest in Vienna's large central cemetery.
In the next video of our two-part series, we will look at how Schoenberg's music influenced his student Alban Berg and Anton Weber, and how they would go on to influence the sound of horror movies.
For those of you interested in learning more about Expressionism or the life of Arnold Schoenberg, we will include our sources and recommended reading in the description below. We will also include links to the musical examples and musical scores that we shared with you in this video.
Thank you for tuning in. We will see you in the next video.